There's a new day dawning, the time is at hand, where the glory of the Lord will be revealed to every man. Open the door, open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory in. Open the door. Open the door, open the door, and let the King of Glory
The fusion of heart, mind, and soul starts right now. Open up the doors, so fling wide, you heavenly gates, and prepare the way of the risen Lord. The Apostle John was on the island of Patmos. He was imprisoned for the testimony of Jesus Christ, and he heard a sound behind him. He said, I looked, there was a door standing open in heaven, and I heard a voice which was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here, and I will show you the things which must take place. That's what we need, my friends, the heavenly perspective of the things that are going on in the world around us, the things the Word of God foretold us would come to pass, those things which must take place, those things which are taking place even now. That is what this show is all about, discussing the issues of the day, discerning the times in which we live from a biblical perspective and world view. So welcome to this brand new live edition of Open Up the Doors. Andy White here. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And we are streaming live on Facebook Live. If you go over to the Open Up the Doors Facebook page at www.facebook.com/FaithFM 91.7, you will be able to see what's happening here behind the scenes at Faith FM. We are located on the east end of Long Island. And I have to tell you, the past few days have been oh man, they've been hot, hazy, and humid. It's like a sauna out there. Summer has hit us with a vengeance, and it's not even like it's only upper 80s. It's not even like it's over 90 degrees, but the humidity is so oppressive. But as I was coming into the station before and driving over the little bridge there over in Sag Harbor and seeing all those sailboats out on the water, it was pleasant. It was a nice sight to behold on my way in, as I left my earlier duties of the day to get here for the broadcast. Anyway, thanks for tuning in all across the fruited plain. If you'd like to email me, you can email me at ajwhite777@icloud.com. That's ajwhite777@icloud.com. And for those of you who are watching on the Facebook live stream, I would appreciate it so much if you would share this stream to your streams and let people know about Open Up the Doors. Invite them to tune in. Invite them to listen in and to join in on the conversation over there on Facebook. Today's broadcast, and I do want to get to it because I got a bunch of stuff on the palette today. Today's broadcast is going to be about, I'm really going to be updating a bunch of stories that we've been following here on Open Up the Doors. You know, it's so easy to speak on a topic once and then kind of move on and forget about it. And then when we do that, we can lose sight of the issue. We can lose sight of the things, of how the stories are developing, because there are stories that are developing. And if we, so I like to go back and just review some things, not just review them, but build on them, because there are things going on with these stories. Today I'm going to be talking about the recent vote at the UNESCO and with the Israel. I'll be talking about what's going on with the embracing of dimitude in Canada. It's just getting really bad up there. And later on in the show, I will have as best of an update as I can regarding the Charlie Gard things. These are the things we've been covering the last several weeks, months here on Open Up the Doors. And I do think it's important to keep up on these things in front of us, to be reminded of them, to see that there's a forward motion in the agenda of the Antichrist spirit. Because that's what it's all about, discerning the signs of the times, as I say at the top of the show, as they relate to these last days and prophetic events. And these things are tied together. But getting to it, I want to talk a little bit about the UN at the top of the show here, and the UNESCO. Another UNESCO delusional vote that was just taken against Israel this past week. But I'm often reminded every time I see something that the UN is doing, particularly when they're coming against Israel, I'm always reminded of Psalm 2, where David wrote, "Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. And the Lord sits in the heavens and he laughs at them. About a year and a half ago is when I first really started following UNESCO a little bit, because about a year and a half ago, Israel was working to defeat a draft UN resolution. I covered that show back in October of 2015. And all of our shows, by the way, I shouldn't say all of them, but most of them are archived and on the Open Up the Doors Facebook page. So if you want to go back and listen to the monologues of a particular show, a particular topic, I would encourage you to do so. But I did a show about back in October of 2015 about UNESCO. Now, Israel was trying to push back against them because they had presented a resolution that was to declare that the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall of the temple, was actually belonged to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and declaring it Muslim territory. And Israel started fighting against that resolution, like I said, about a year and a half ago. And then almost a year to the day, and I did a show on that this past October in 2016, 6-7 months ago, whenever that was. This is July, so it's probably about 8 or 9 months ago. But I did a follow-up to that story because, lo and behold, UNESCO took a vote and stated that the Western Wall was part of the Al-Aqsa compound, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and it was crazy that this 58-member executive board of the United Nations, UNESCO, by the way, for those of you who may not know, UNESCO stands for the Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and they're just voting one absurd resolution after another. And last October, after that resolution was voted on, Benjamin Netanyahu said that UNESCO, quote, had become a theater of the absurd in taking another delusional decision. And Bibi had said back then, to say that Israel has no connection to the Temple Mount and the Western Wall is like saying that China has no connection to the Great Wall of China. It really was a great example. Or that Egypt has no connection to the pyramids. That's how absurd these votes from UNESCO are. They're just totally ridiculous against. I mean, they would never vote to say that the Great Wall of China belonged to Tibet. They would never do that, would they? But I digress. But this absurd decision, Benjamin Netanyahu went on to say, was that UNESCO has lost what little legitimacy it had left. Well, they've done it again, folks. The theater of the absurd continues, and the imbeciles at UNESCO and the UN this past week declared that the town of Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs is actually in Palestinian territory. And lo and behold, once again, Bibi Netanyahu took to the airwaves and social media feeds to proclaim another obvious absurdity. Netanyahu said this past week, once again, there is another delusional UNESCO decision. This is a quote from Netanyahu. This time, they decided that the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron is a Palestinian site, meaning that it's not Jewish and that the site is in danger. Not a Jewish site? Who's buried there? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, our patriarchs and matriarchs. And the site is in danger according to the UN? It is only in those places where Israel is, such as Hebron, that freedom of religion for all is ensured. Hebron's cave of the patriarchs is Judaism's second holiest city. Well, the Wailing Wall was their first holiest site, so it probably is at least consistent in a ridiculous way with UNESCO. If they're going to deprive Israel of their holiest site, well, they're going to come against their second holiest site. At least these imbeciles are consistent in their lunacy, I guess. Not that that's saying much, of course. But the tomb of the patriarchs is Judaism's second holiest city. It's been revered for thousands of years by the Jews. How, by any stretch of the imagination, was it in danger from Israel? I mean, that's what the UN was saying. That's what UNESCO was saying, that Hebron was in danger. Of what? Of them, actually. That's what it was in danger of, the UN. And in a statement after the vote this past week, it was about a week ago they took this crazy vote, but in a statement from the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, Haley said, quote, UNESCO has voted to designate the old city of Hebron and the tomb of the patriarchs as part of the Palestinian territory and a World Heritage Site, despite protests by the United States, Israel, and other countries. The UNESCO vote on Hebron is tragic on several levels. It represents an affront to history, and that's almost an understatement, Nikki. Yeah, it is an affront to history. It's an absurdity, as Bibi Netanyahu declared. But she goes on to say it's an affront. It represents an affront to history. It undermines the trust that is needed for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to be successful. And I highlighted this in my notes. And it further discredits an already highly questionable UN agency. Now remember, last October, Netanyahu said that UNESCO had lost what little legitimacy it had left. Now it's beyond the pale. And now the U.S. ambassador says it's even further discredited, and it's a highly questionable agency. So I have a question after saying all that. Why are we still in UNESCO? And even in the UN, for that matter. The UN, along with UNESCO, is a bad joke. A very bad joke. And in my humble opinion, the United Nations is nothing but a bunch of useful idiots for anti-Semites and corrupt globalists. In every facet of this deplorable organization, oh, the left loves throwing around that word deplorable. Well, the United Nations is a deplorable organization. They are corrupt and devoid of any credibility whatsoever. And I, for one, say we need to stop their funding and get the U.S. out of this pit of snakes. And instead of wasting our time trying to put some semblance of legitimacy on this disingenuous organization, we would be better off exposing their illegitimacy and showing them to be the miscreant organization that they truly are. I believe the U.S. should walk away from the UN. But I won't hold my breath, of course. Corruption runs amok in the UN, folks, with everything from money laundering scandals. I mean, remember back, some of you might remember this. Man, it probably was about, I don't know, had to be probably at least 20 years ago. But remember the oil for food scandal? Where the UN was secretly buying oil from Saddam Hussein so they can get supposedly food into Iraq because they were under UN sanctions, and it was and Saddam Hussein was skimming the money off of that, making billions of dollars off of it. The oil for food scandal, corruption. There was the Congo peacekeeping scandals. Those criminal enterprises, and that's what that's what the United Nations is. The United Nations, I'm going to call them right out right now. They are a criminal enterprise, and the debacles that happened back then and through the years has done nothing to help the UN's reputation. In fact, it has exposes the fact that it is rotten to the core with corruption and mismanagement. Do you remember the so-called humanitarian and peacekeeping debacles, which resulted in hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of deaths? I didn't look up the statistic, but I do remember the genocide in Rwanda and Bosnia and Sudan. And all of those genocides could only prove, and should have proven, to show how irrelevant the UN is when it comes to humanitarian intervention. Oh, I know, but people always talk about how we need the UN for humanitarian intervention. Go back and remember and look into those genocides. The UN was worthless. Oh, but there's more. I was on a tirade when I was looking up all this information for the Today Show. I really went on a tear because there's more. There are travesties galore in all of the different agencies and divisions of the UN. For example, there was a hugely discredited UN Commission on Human Rights. It was so corrupt, it was so bad that did they disband it? No, they just changed the name. You know, so I can go down a trail with that one. They didn't abandon the UN Commissions on Human Rights. They just redefined it, and now it's called the United Nations Human Rights Council, and it's filled and seated. The Human Rights Council is filled and seated with some of the world's worst human rights violators. Even Sudan, a country with the most appalling human rights track record, has been an active member and even sat on the leadership seats of the now defunct UN Commission on Human Rights from 2002 2005. Sudan was a leading voice on this commission. It's again the theater of the absurd. Bibi Netanyahu could not have stated it more cogently. And of course, in more recent years, our own Washington, D.C. has looked to the United Nations Security Council to play a role in the Iranian and North Korea nuclear issues. And look where that has gotten us, folks. And I won't even mention, nor do I have the time to get into the useless 17, or was it 18, UN resolutions against Iraq and Saddam Hussein during the 90s that were violated every time and never upheld. They were never enforced, and Saddam Hussein just laughed at the UN, which ultimately led us into the Gulf War. But that part of history is conveniently forgotten by many. But the hits just keep on coming. Then there is the United Nations persistent upholding of the hoax of anthropogenic global warming, complete with doctored and falsified climate change reports that the IPCC, which is a UN entity, rubber stamps, which is another chink in the armor of their credibility. The IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is an international organization created by the United Nations to evaluate and report on the state of climate change science. Again, a topic I won't go into today. But it so lacks credibility. It is so full of corruption. And my point in saying all of this really is this. Why does the United States continue to associate with the United Nations and waste billions of dollars to float this ship of fools? No doubt, of course, they have their reasons. And as I said, I won't hold my breath because I recognize the United States won't leave the United Nations, though I wish there was an outcry and pressure to at least stop the funding. Why does the United States continue to associate with this organization? Ostensibly, I'm sure it's to show that we are leaders in the world order. But it's not our leadership that the United Nations wants. It's our money. And it's our subservience to their agenda, because they do have an agenda, my friends. When will the American people stand up and say enough is enough? We want out. I came across a report written for the Heritage Foundation by a guy named Nigel Gardner. You can find the full report, and it was a very lengthy report for those of you who might be interested. The name of the report was The Decline and Fall of the United Nations, Why the UN Has Failed and How It Can Be Reformed. And it's a lengthy report. And I read the whole thing earlier in the week. But Nigel Gardner noted that, and I'll quote, the UN, without the United States, is a greatly weakened organization financially, politically, and strategically. Without the presence of the world's greatest power, the UN would be an impotent body, lacking in legitimacy. I almost want to laugh reading this. They already are. Financially insecure, and doomed to go down the same path as its predecessor, the League of Nations. The United Nations needs the United States, and it is in the interest of the world body to undergo thorough reform to make it an effective and relevant world organization for the 21st century. The United Nations needs America more than America needs the United Nations. End of quote. Now, it was a great report, and Nigel Gardner did an excellent study and report on this. But it seems to me, having said that, when he says that the United Nations without America would be a greatly weakened organization financially, politically, and strategically, an impotent body, they already are with us. They already are. So again, why do we keep propping the United Nations up and legitimizing it? U.S. ambassadors U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley's statement this past week regarding this latest UNESCO vote regarding Hebron. She went on to stress that decisions such as these are influencing the deliberation. She hinted that there was deliberation on whether the U.S. wishes to remain a member of this UN body. She stated that, quote, the United States is currently evaluating the appropriate level of its continued engagement at UNESCO. Well, that's a great start. In my opinion, it's truly time for the United States to disassociate itself not only from UNESCO, but from the entire snake pit that is the United Nations. I'll be back with more. Stick around. Matt Redman, we are the free. We give you all the glory, Jesus. Thank you for setting us free. Welcome back, everybody. Andy White here. You are listening to Open Up the Doors here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in Epic, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. And maybe this is one of those shows where I need to state that the views expressed by the host of the show, namely me, are molded by the Word of God along with the empirical evidence, both experiential and observational, which is lived out on a daily basis. But the views of this host and of Open Up Doors may not necessarily be those of Faith FM. I am definitely sharing a lot of my opinions today, so don't hold it against anybody else. If you want to write me or complain about something, you can email me at ajwhite777 at iCloud.com. That's ajwhite777 at iCloud.com. My views are mine, but they should be shared by everybody because I'm right. And I'm just joking a little bit there, folks. Lighten up a little bit. Hey, but I got some serious stuff right here coming up for the second block. Again, I'm just kind of building upon some of the issues and some of the topics we've talked about as I see them develop in our world around us. And again, back in March, I did a show called Creeping Sharia. Again, it's in the archives if you missed that show. But I did a show back in March called Creeping Sharia, and primarily based around a lot of what's going on in Canada. And something I said in that show, by way of reminder, was I said that the Canadian Parliament was essentially declaring its voluntary embracing of a dhimmitude-like status by passing a form of Sharia blasphemy laws in Canada. Yes, there is a creeping Sharia that is advancing, and a dhimmitude where Islam will be exalted and given a special status above all else. Everything outside of Islam will be diminished under dhimmitude. All else will be suppressed and oppressed, because that is the Antichrist agenda. That is what the Islamic political, religious, socio-political ideology is all about. So along those lines, I'm sharing that to say this. Did you happen to catch this story that just came out this past week? Apparently, this guy, his name is John Alebi, or Alabi. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I'll say Alebi. This guy, John Alebi, he migrated to Canada legally from Nigeria 22 years ago. And of course he came from Canada. He came from Nigeria to Canada in hopes of building a better life for him and his family. And after almost 25 years of being a law-abiding, hard-working member of society, oh, by the way, John Alabi he's a Christian. He was a landlord, a landowner, a businessman, but he never imagined that his adopted country would label him a human rights violator and order him to pay. Here's the headline of the story. This guy Alabi has been ordered to pay $12,000 fine in compensation to his Muslim tenants for, according to the headline, not taking his shoes off when he went into the home to show it to new tenants. See these Muslim tenants were only in his place for 2 or 3 months, according to the story, and they were leaving. So he was showing the apartment, the home, to new prospective tenants, which of course is a landlord's right. And he had worked out with them in very pliable ways when he could bring people over. They asked for advance notice, and he was giving them advance notice. But after a while, apparently according to the story, they stopped responding. So one day he walks over there to show the place, and he didn't take his shoes off. So, long story short, these Muslim tenants took this guy to court for failing in his duty to accommodate their religious needs. Quote. That's a quote from the court, from the tribunal that found Mr. Alabi guilty. Quote, he failed in his duty to accommodate their religious needs. It's like the reverse here. As I'm like reading this quote, I'm thinking it's kind of the opposite here in this country. In this country, they're finding us when we won't give in to people, the bakers, the photographers, the wedding cakes, that whole thing. We're being fined for holding to our religious needs. But in Canada, it's kind of the opposite. At any rate, this guy, each of the tenants was awarded $6,000 each. Mr. Alabi says, quote, I was humiliated. I was made to feel I have no rights. Well, under dimitude, you don't. I was made to feel that I'm not wanted in society. For the first time in my 20-something years in Canada, I am sorry that I came to this country. What a thing to say. I feel powerless. That's the whole point. They rented my place for only 2 months. 2 months! It's just not fair. Mr. Alabi says, I have been victimized. Quote, they are using their religion to victimize me. Yes, dimitude. Canada, I should say Canadistan, because Canada is really, Canada should be renamed Canadistan, because that is what it's becoming, my friends. Because Canada is in essence, behaving like a conquered dhimmi state, extracting jizya from its citizens to appease its Islamic masters, who rank highest in the Canadian human rights hierarchy. For those who might not know what a dhimmi is basically, and the word dimitude comes from the word dhimmi. Dhimmi is basically the non-Muslim population in an Islamic society. It's similar in a way to what the word in Judaism to Gentile would be. Gentiles were the non-Jews. Except the big difference being with dimitude, there is a second-class citizenship. You see, the Jews never thought the Gentiles were second-class citizens. They really didn't. But I won't get into all that right now. But in a dimitude, the non-Muslim population are second-class citizens. And according to the Quran, as I've shared in the Hadith, the jizya tax must be paid by the dhimmis as a sign of submission. And that's really what's happened here now. In not too veiled away with this poor guy that got fined $12,000 because he didn't take his shoes off. Dimitude is when the non-Muslim population appeases and surrenders to the demands of the Sharia, which is exactly what the Canadian Parliament and Canadian laws, which are coming out more and more and more in favor of Sharia, that is what they are doing. And from Canada to Britain to France, and I've spoken on these issues many times in the past few months and years. But what's going on in Canada is this creeping Sharia. And my friends, it's just across the border. And I'm going to get into something in a minute. But it's happening all, especially from Canada to Britain to France. There's what some are calling a silent jihad. A silent jihad is underway in France, for instance, that some are saying a jihad by court, which is attacking the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech under the guise of anti-discrimination. And in Canada and in Europe, in England, in France, Germany, any journalist, politician, lawyer, or intellectual who talks or writes either about Islam or some of its representatives in a critical way is at risk of being taken to court for racism or, quote, outraging a group of people because of their religion. Robert Spencer, very intelligent and gifted writer. I read several I shouldn't say several. I've written one major work by Robert Spencer, but I read his blogs a lot. Robert Spencer is an Islamic scholar, and he's the editor of a blog called Jihad Watch. It's very informative. If you've never gone to the Jihad Watch blog, I would suggest you start doing that and reading what he's writing. It's very informative. But Robert Spencer said that Canada has been all but, his words, conquered by Islam, which is seen as a protected class by its enablers on the left. And according to Robert Spencer, and I agree from what I'm seeing, the U.S. is not far behind in the race to establish Islam as a dominant religion in the culture, thanks to political correctness that seeks to destroy anyone who speaks a negative word about Islam or who doesn't take their shoes off when they enter a room, of course. The city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, recently implemented a hate crimes hotline for residents to call in and report their employers, report to the police, friend or family members, if they suspect any anti-Muslim bias. I mean, think about that. They're not saying, call in if you see something, say something about terrorism. Now they're saying call in if you suspect an anti-Muslim bias. There's a hotline in Minneapolis for specifically anti-Muslim bias accusations, whether in word or deed. The cities of San Francisco and Nashville, it's hard, I find it amazing for Nashville, have similar snitch lines encouraging people to report fellow residents and accuse them of being anti-Muslim. Speaking of Minnesota, a little bit of a planned digression, because I think these things are connected. But a small town in Minnesota is getting a lot of attention this past couple of weeks for a satanic monument that's being set up in their Veterans Park. The monument is going up for the Satanic Temple, and it features an upturned helmet atop a black cube. I have the story on the Open Up the Doors Facebook page, which has a picture of this monument, this black cube. It's a black cube with pentagrams on it. But when I first saw this picture, the first thing that hit me, I could not help but be reminded of another black cube. The resemblance is uncanny. Well, a black cube is a black cube, of course. But it looks like the Kaaba over there in Mecca. When I saw that picture, there was something eerily familiar about that picture. That black cube, that satanic monument that's going up. It will be the first satanic monument on public property in United States history. That's going up in a small town in Minnesota. Think about that. And I don't think there's a coincidence. You might think that these two things are separate. You might think they're separate issues. But I think they're very much connected spiritually, I should say. If a stronger Sharia law movement comes to America, my friends, or even as an Islamic revolution of sorts, it will start and come from the Minnesota and or Michigan area. Michigan is on the verge of electing America's first Muslim governor, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who's a liberal Democrat, and he would like to become the nation's first Muslim governor in Michigan. Michigan's home to the city of Dearborn. The city of Dearborn has the highest Muslim population outside of the Middle East. Did you know that? Actually, I did not know that until recently. I knew there was a lot of immigrants there. I knew there was a lot of Palestinian Jordanians there. I had friends who were Jordanian that came from Dearborn, Michigan. But they've got the highest Muslim population outside of the Middle East. And the state of Michigan last year made news when the city of Hamtramck elected its first all-Muslim city council. Now this guy who's running for governor of Michigan, Abdul El-Sayed, has said if elected governor that he will fight to make Michigan, quote-unquote, a sanctuary state. What a marvelous idea, don't you think? A state where tens of thousands of Muslim refugees and immigrants come to live, and it's just across the border from I can't even say it anymore. Kanadistan, that's it. Kanadistan, right across the border from Kanadistan. This guy wants to make Michigan a sanctuary state. Of course he would want to make Michigan a sanctuary state. What a great idea. And this guy has the full backing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Isn't that just precious? But this is going to be something to watch in the months ahead. A candidate for governor who is promoted and out of the Muslim Brotherhood. If that doesn't tell you that there's a creeping Sharia fire burning in Michigan, I don't know what does. Between the UN constantly attacking and trying to isolate Israel, along with the advancing Islamic hijra and dimitude of the West, my friends, these things, I believe, are connected. It is the advancing last days agenda of the spirit of Antichrist. We are living in exciting prophetic times. But I got to take a break, and I'm going to have more when I get back. Stick around. Here's the Newsboys with Mighty to Save, because no matter what's going on, we still are the light of the world, the salt of the earth, and God still is mighty to save. I'll be back in a moment. The fusion of heart, mind, and soul. This is Open Up the Doors with Andy White here on Faith FM, WEGB 90.7 and 93.3 in that peak, WEGQ 91.7 in Quag. Hey, thanks for joining me, everyone, on this very hot, hazy, and humid summer day on the east end of Long Island here in beautiful Sag Harbor. But it is summertime is cooking outside. That is for certain. Hey, if you are tuned in, I am streaming live on the Open Up the Doors Facebook page. You could join the conversation over there on the Open Up the Doors Facebook page at facebook.com/faithfm91.7 and join the conversation that's going on over there. And please share this in your stream. Let us know you're out there and leave a comment or a text there on the Faith FM Facebook page as well. I haven't plugged the Faith FM Facebook page in a while. I should tell people about that as well. That's been kind of growing very quietly and steadily on its own. But there is a Faith FM Facebook page as well, facebook.com/Eastgate Broadcasting as well, where you can, stay plugged in and in tune with all that's going on here at the radio station Faith FM. I just got something. I want to quickly, I got only a few minutes left, but I wanted to touch on the Charlie Gard situation. But before I do, I just got something that relates to what I was saying in the second block about the creeping Sharia in Canada, as well as how the UN is attacking Israel through UNESCO. And I just got this newsletter in. Canada bans Israeli wines produced in quote-unquote occupied territory. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, a government body, has banned wines from Judea and Samaria because it says the label, products of Israel, is unacceptable, that's a quote, for wines produced in occupied territory. This is Canada. This is Canada. This isn't Egypt or Syria or Jordan. This is Canada dissing Israel. I mean, this is really alarming to me. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency, I just got this, so I haven't really had time to assimilate it. I haven't had really time to think on it, but I'm just reading it as I got it. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has ordered the Liquor Control Board of Ontario to prohibit vendors from selling wines produced in Judea and Samaria because they are labeled as products of Israel. According to the letter, quote, the government of Canada does not recognize Israel's sovereignty over the territories occupied in 1967, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. As such, wine products from these regions that are labeled as products of Israel would not be acceptable and would be considered misleading. You know what's really stupid about this? I will bet you, now I don't know, and I have friends who do know, and I won't name them over the air right now, but I'm going to contact some friends because I have a couple of friends who were missionaries for a while over in Israel, and I would bet you dollars to donuts that there are Israeli Arabs who work on these wineries. So for Trudeau, oh man, I got to rein it in. I can't. I'm going to rein in my anger. I'm going to rein in my temper. But they think they're hurting Israel. They're going to be hurting possibly. Again, I'm not sure. I'm just kind of shooting off the cuff right here. But they're going to be hurting possibly, quote-unquote, Palestinians, who really, there's no such thing as a Palestinian, I won't go into that. They're Arabs, but there are Israeli Arabs who live peacefully in Israel, and they work in Israeli-owned shops. In fact, they even have their own Arab-owned shops. Freedom of religion and freedom of everything. Israel is a free nation. So Canada, in its arrogance and its stupidity, is going to boycott and not sell wine from Israel, possibly hurting the wine business, which is probably, they probably have employees who are Arab. Just saying, folks. Just saying. This shows you the stupidity and the arrogance and the under the guise of being pro-Palestinian. It's not pro-Palestinian. It's anti-Semite. That's what it is. Pure and simple. But I am running out of time. I'm looking at my clock, and I did want to touch a little bit on what's going on with little baby Charlie Gard, because last week I pretty much did the whole show based on the situation of Charlie Gard. Most of you know what's happening with him, this little infant that's in England. The parents are trying to bring him to America for experimental treatment. They had a little bit of a reprieve this past week, because last week they were supposed to take the baby off of life support. They got a reprieve, and the judge said they got one more chance to present their evidence for this experimental treatment, and that was happening today. So I got a little bit of the headlines today, but apparently what happened today is that the parents of Charlie Gard stormed out of Britain's High Court this morning amid an emotional hearing as they fight to take him, according to this article, to the United States for experimental treatment, of course. The judge, Mr. Justice Nicholas Francis, instructed Charlie's parents on Monday to cite the source of all evidence when it was produced and what difference it would make. What difference would it make for their son? I mean, just the language makes me crazy. Depending on that evidence, he may then reconsider his previous ruling that further treatment would be futile. But about 2 hours into today's meeting, Charlie's parents abruptly left the court after disagreeing with a comment by the judge. Chris Gard and Connie Yates stormed out of the hearing when the judge suggested that their argument has not been consistent. Chris Gard punched the table. I can understand that. While his wife said, quote, "We said he's not in suffering and in pain. If he was, we wouldn't be here fighting to keep him in that suffering and pain." I'm paraphrasing it. But a U.S. doctor is due to give evidence to the court today. That might have already transpired. I don't know. The parents released a statement that is posted on the Open Up the Doors Facebook page. I don't have time to get all into this now. I am running out of time here. But I will say this. Go over to the page, read the update on the Charlie Gard situation. The parents did raise $1.5 million to bring him here. And this whole thing, I think, is very distressing. These parents deserve the right to bring their son to the U.S. to try to find treatment for him. That shouldn't even have to be discussed. It's their prerogative. But the hospital and the government will not allow them to make the decisions about Charlie's life and medical care, and that is unfathomable to me. By what moral authority, by what divine authority gives them the right to pull the plug on this infant against the parents' wishes? And in part, it's the arrogance of the United Nations. This caught my attention this morning when I was reading this update. I went, oh my gosh, look at this. I began the show with my diatribe against the United Nations, and I stand by every word of it. But talk about the arrogance of these people. I'm going to close the show the way I opened up, with the many reasons we need to get out of that pit of snakes. This is a quote from the professor of healthcare law at the University College of London. Quote, "Unlike the USA, English law is focused on the protection of children's rights." How many abortions do they have in the UK? Somebody get me that number, please. Unlike the USA, condescending, English law is focused on the protection of children's rights. The USA is the only country in the world that is not a party to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It does not recognize that children have rights independent of their parents. It's arrogant statism on parade. But my friends, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. And we have got we're praying. We're praying for Charlie Gard and his family. And I'm playing this tune for them. Again, last week I dedicated a tune. This week I'm dedicating a tune. The righteous cry out. And we're crying out for little Charlie Gard. Will continue to be with us. The Lord will deliver him out of them all. Hallelujah. Ken Henry, the righteous cry out. Well, it's time for me to go now, folks. It's been great having you here with me today. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great week, everyone. Please join me again same time next week. There's some great Christian programming coming up, so keep it right here on Faith FM.